Hi, welcome back to Kiersti's virtual classroom. Today we're talking about mass wasting. So, what is mass wasting exactly? This is any movement of Earth materials down slope due to gravity. Obviously, gravity is not the only thing that can cause mass wasting, but we'll talk about all the different triggers. Gravity just happens to be one of the main components that pulls it from the top of the hill to the bottom of the hill. So what does mass wasting include? This includes landslides, rock falls, debris flows, subsidence, rock avalanches, and many more. So we'll talk about the different types, how they are triggered, and what kind of mitigation measures we can apply to help keep them kind of on the slope or help them not potentially damage anything. So the main thing that is an issue is that it does threaten lives. So if you happen to get hit in a rock avalanche by a very large boulder, you're not necessarily going to make it through that impact. It also threatens a lot of homes, businesses, and there are about 25 to 50 deaths per year, which is not an insignificant number. It doesn't compare to the number of deaths from an accident or a tornado every year, but it's still a significant number for us. And it does cause about $2 billion in damage per year. It definitely causes a lot more damage than deaths, but nonetheless, it's still important to protect people. In the US, it does more damage technically than earthquakes, volcanoes, and tornadoes combined. While it may not take out as many lives, it does cause more damage. And we'll talk a little bit about why that would be. So only floods and hurricanes technically do more damage, and that those are water involved. So anything that involves water usually ends up causing a lot more damage. And the yearly losses keep increasing, and that also has to do something with our economy. So our economy is going up as of about a year ago. Now it's kind of going down, but the yearly loss is going to increase because of economic growth and because of people moving into areas where it is landslide prone and not doing the proper prep work in order to prep the home so that it doesn't experience the landslides that may or may not have happened there in the past. We'll talk more about that at the end of the PowerPoint here. Okay, so in the United States, there are a lot of landslides that occur. This is a landslide inventory. There's a link here that you can click on. We won't click on it right now, but I'll have this posted on Canvas for you, so you can click on that link. So as you can see, most of the areas that we experience a lot of landslide activity are very mountainous areas. And that is because you need hills to bring material down. If you're in a flat valley, no material is going to go from the top of the hill to the bottom of the hill because there's no hill. So wherever you will see landslides is going to be where there are a lot of mountains or hills. Okay, so in California, we have a very high landslide hazard along the coast. The highest is along the coast because we have a lot of mountainous regions along the coast, a lot of hills, and we also have something called coastal erosion. So when waves beat against the cliffs, you're going to see a lot of material being pulled off of those cliffs, and it weakens the cliff. So weakened banks, weakened cliffs will lead to a lot of landslide failures. Okay, so a little anatomy on a landslide. This is a basic landslide. Okay, so I'll use the term landslide and mass wasting a little bit interchangeably. The broad scheme of things is mass wasting covers all of the different types, whereas a landslide particularly is something that is sliding down the slope. Okay, so here we have a basic landslide anatomy, excuse me. We have a slip surface or a surface of rupture. Towards the top, we have what we call a crown, which is going to be right above where material started to be removed from the side of the mountain. We will have crown cracks up here, which can be little like ripples in the landscape, or it can actually be like a crevice that opened up a little bit. Below that we have the main scarp, which is basically a new exposed material just at the head or the top of the landslide. Just below the main scarp we have the head, which is the main body of material, the top portion of the material that is being moved. We have a right flank and we have a left flank of each. We also have the original ground surface here, which is what we use for reference for things that are moving. We have a minor scarp sometimes, maybe not always. There's the main body, which is the biggest portion of the landslide that is moving, the landslide mass. We also have a couple other things down here at the bottom where we start to see the foot of the landslide, which is the bottom portion. Basically, that is not in any area where the original material used to be. So it's on brand new ground down here. This is also where we see the toe, which is the very terminus or the very end of the landslide. Sometimes you will get transverse cracks and transverse ridges. Sometimes you'll see radial cracks towards the bottom of the landslide. Those are some of your basic pieces. So something like this I would potentially put on an exam, get rid of some of these labels and ask you what it belongs to. Just kind of labeling what it is. Okay, so going through classifications, we have this chart here, which looks like it can be kind of confusing, but a lot of it is repeat information. So we have type of material here, and under that we have bedrock and engineered soils. So engineering soils is, are we looking at soil that is like sand, silt, clay type of material? Is it a combination of all those things? If it's mostly somewhat of like a sand, a silt, a clay type of material, we call that earth. So if it's mostly fine material, we call that earth. If it's predominantly coarse, so it has big cobbles, big boulders in it, we call that debris. Okay, and then over here with bedrock, we call that rock. So if we say it's a rock fall, that means that it is made of bedrock. If it's an earth fall, it's made of earth. It's made of predominantly fine material. And then a debris fall, like I said, would be the predominantly coarse material. Okay, so then we have type of movement over here on the left. So we have falls, topples, slides, lateral spreads, and flows. And then down here at the bottom, we can get a combination of these guys. And most of the time, it is a combination, but there might be one that's more predominant than the other. Okay, so then we have, if we go through each of these, we have falls, which would be rock falls, earth falls, debris falls. Rock falls obviously are going to be something that's free falling in the air that's made of bedrock. Topples are similar to falls, but they just kind of topple over. Slides are things that move along a slip surface, and these can be rotational or translational. It depends on whether that slip surface is got a curve to it or if it's planar. Okay, and we'll talk about these in a little bit. Lateral spreads are things that just kind of spread out. Flows are things that actually flow through something like a stream channel. And then, like I said, the combination, you can have something that's more kind of like it starts as a fall and then it translates into a flow if it falls into a stream bed, things like that. So falls are going to be the first one we look at. And this is anything that is detached from the original rock and free falls in the air. So anything that has a rapid free falling of material, whether that's rock, earth, or debris, it's going to be called a fall. Now, things that end up at the bottom of slopes, we talked about this a little bit with erosion, is the talus slope down here at the bottom. It's a combination of a bunch of different sizes and shapes of rocks that pile up at the bottom of a slope. Most falls are actually rock falls. There's not as many earth falls because earth doesn't get steep enough, like the fine material doesn't usually get steep enough to where you're going to see free-falling material that's usually more predominant in rock, but it does happen. So here's some images of what rock falls would look like. This is very predominant in Yosemite Valley, especially. Most of what contributes to the erosion and the shape of the landscape today is through rock falls. All right, topples is the next one we'll talk about, which is similar to rock falls, but there's no actual free falling of material. It's actually just kind of toppling over, as you can see kind of in this picture here. So there is a rotation from the center of gravity along a particular access point, and it just kind of topples over. This usually happens pretty fast. Okay, so things that contribute to falls and topples is stream erosion. So in Yosemite Valley, for instance, the Merced River has incised a deep canyon, and then in addition to that deep incision of the stream erosion, there's also been significant glaciation of the valley that has carved those walls, and they were oversteepened. When they're oversteepened, material will eventually fall off, and you'll see a lot of mass wasting, which will help kind of open up the valley a little bit. And so most of that is contributed by the cracks in the rock. So we've talked about that before with joints. Any joints or cracks in the rock will also help contribute to the removal of the material from the cliff face down into the bottom of the hill. All right, so then the next one we're going to talk about is slides. So these are your typical landslides. They can either happen on a flat surface or on a curved surface. So if it's on a curved surface, we call that rotational because they kind of rotate on that surface. And then the translational are called translational because they literally just slide down a planar translational slope. Okay, these are primarily driven by rainfall, and they're much slower than falls. Because as you can imagine, rocks free falling in the air is going to happen really fast due to gravity. But here, things are just kind of slipping, so there's more friction involved. So you're going to see it happen a lot slower. Sometimes they move so slow that you don't notice until there's significant damage to a fence or a home. But then other times they can move a little bit faster, especially if they're very well saturated from recent rainfall. So here are some videos that you can watch. Like I said, this will be on Canvas for you, so you can click on these and watch them. They're all YouTube videos, but they're very cool to watch the different slides. All right, lateral spreads is the next one we'll talk about. This is basically when material, rock or soil is starting to subside and spread away from each other. So a lot of this happens when you have very saturated material. So this material will be very saturated and it starts to laterally spread. This is very slow unless it's triggered by something like a volcanic eruption or an earthquake, something that shakes the ground, and it will move fairly quickly. But otherwise, it would be pretty slow, and it kind of relates to something called a creep, where material just very slowly starts to move. Okay, and then flows, like I said, these are a little bit different. These are usually in a stream channel, and they are driven by fluid. So there's some sort of viscous fluid, usually it's rain or melted snow, and it is carrying debris, boulders, cobbles, sometimes even smaller, finer material downslope at a very fast rate. These can move really quickly, and they can be very dangerous because not only are they bringing very large material down the slope with them, but they're also driven by water, and water can cause a lot of damage to homes, foundations, things like that. So these can cause probably some of the worst damage, especially in the low-lying areas. So here is an example of one that happened in Big Sur in California. along the central coast, and it brought down basically a bunch of mud, debris. It can even carry car parts. It can carry tree branches. It's very similar to a lahar. So debris flows are like mud flows. You probably heard that term before. And the material is not all the same size. So you can see there's a bunch of different sizes of material here. And all of it comes down in this big wave of water, and it impacts whatever is downslope, and it can cause a lot of damage. So here are some links to different debris flow videos on YouTube that are pretty cool. I recommend checking those out. All right, so what triggers these landslides? So we've talked a little bit about water saturation. Rainfall plays a huge factor because material can be fairly stable for a long period of time, and then once water is introduced and the material becomes saturated, it can start to move and flow with that material. And so it decreases the material's bound to itself. So the cohesion between individual particles or individual sand grains, for instance, will decrease it, so you will increase in movement. Rapid snowmelt also increases the likelihood of having a landslide. This again just adds water to soil. So basically any water change, water level changes, this is increase in groundwater height, this is filling of reservoirs, this could be irrigation along the side of a hill. All of those things will cause water saturation, which will lead to landslide triggering. Other things that can happen is shaking. So any ground shaking will obviously loosen soils, it will loosen rock, and this can come in the form of volcanic eruption, it can come in the form of earthquakes, human activity, so if we have blasting, construction in an area, and then meteorite impacts will also increase landslide possibilities, but those are obviously much more rare than some of these other things. Alright, so other things that happen is undercutting or oversteepening of slopes. So when we build roads, a lot of the time we are significantly altering the slope along that hill or along that mountain. And undercutting some of these or oversteepening some of these hills will increase in their loss of stability. And so they will no longer be at equilibrium, where they've been happy after erosion has hit them for hundreds of millions of years. And then eventually it will give way because that support is no longer there. You've removed its support and oversteepened the slope. So other things that can happen is stream undercutting, waves hitting against a cliff. All of those things weaken the slope. We've already talked about us cutting into the toe of a landslide, so if we remove its support system, obviously that's going to cause it to want to move. Lack of vegetation, so vegetation helps anchor soil. We've talked about that a little bit with streams and surface water, but if you have a lack of vegetation, then the material won't stay against the slope as well. This happens a lot with wildfires. Wildfires will come through an area and completely weaken some slopes, and then what happens right after a rainfall is you see a lot of debris flows. So a lot of material comes down because it's no longer being held in place with that vegetation. And sometimes you get triggers sometimes you get landslides without any trigger at all. Rock falls happen all the time on bright sunny days where it's not raining, it hasn't rained in a while, there's no earthquake that occurs. Sometimes it just happens and there's no particular trigger that we can associate with it. But what can we do to help mitigate it? You've probably seen something like this on some highways where it looks like this giant wall that's trying to hold the slope up there, and that's what it is. It's trying to hold the slope back from coming out onto the road. So with falls and topples, a couple of different things that we can do is put in rock curtains. So you've probably seen this on some highways where there are basically, it looks like fences up against the slope, and that's to prevent material from coming out onto the road. Other things that we can see are retaining walls. So this one here down on the bottom left, This is a retaining wall that's not working too well. It's leaning pretty hard. But those are some things to help kind of keep material back. Other kind of more advanced methods are things like rock sheds. These have been pretty popular lately, so that the material can just kind of go over the shed and down this other side of the slope here, and it won't impact the roadway, which is really helpful for people like Caltrans employees because they have to go by and constantly clean up the road if there's not something like this in place. Other things that you can do if there isn't active movement along that particular slope is you can put in rock bolts and shear pins. So that's what's over here in this kind of background image. It's basically like installing a bunch of bolts into the rock to kind of hold it in place. So usually you try to find joints and cracks in the rock that exist and try to anchor those to more stable rock so that things don't move as much. But they're not necessarily sheer, very, very 100% ways to keep the rocks from falling. It's just a mitigation measure to try to keep less rocks from falling. It's not going to keep all of them back. All right, slides. We can also use the retaining walls. We can also use the rock sheds. Other things that we can use, though, are lateral drains. So with slides, they're particularly driven by water saturation. So if there is drains along the sides of the hill, so they would be on a hill slide over here on the top left, you would see them go horizontally this way. So basically parallel to the slope. You wouldn't put them this way. So that'll help kind of drain and desaturate the slide mass so that it doesn't move down slope. Spreads, you're also going to want to try to avoid saturation. So here you can also put in some drains or do some dewatering of the material, but you want to try to keep it as dewatered or unsaturated as possible. Flows are pretty interesting up until fairly recently. There weren't a whole lot of mitigation measures for them. A lot of them also happen very rurally, and then they end up impacting more urban areas downslope. So one of the cool things that we've seen in recent years are these catchment nets. So this is a debris flow catchment net, and it's designed based on the particular debris flow that you would see in an area. So they take into account boulder size, flow rate, how quickly the material typically comes down these channels, and then obviously the size and width of the channel also comes into account. And then what they're doing here is they're not holding back all of the water and all of the flow. They are letting the finer stuff still come through, but they're holding back the big stuff. And the better you can hold back a lot of the big things, it'll help slow the flow, and you won't necessarily see as much of an impact downstream. Okay, so this is about slowing the flow and holding back the big stuff that can cause major, major damage. So this is a really cool video. Look through the PowerPoint and watch it. We can't watch it here through this, I don't believe, but you can watch it. It's just the installation of one of these debris flow nets and then watching it actually work. It's pretty cool. All right, so what do landslides cost? So we have indirect costs and we have direct costs. Obviously, indirect costs include loss of production of whatever it is you are doing, whether that's ag, industry, also real estate value. If there are known landslides in your area where they were not known before, you're gonna lose a little bit of value, maybe some tax, property loss. Mitigation measures are indirect costs as well, loss of life, any water quality impacts you may see. But direct costs are the actual repairs, the replacement of anything that was damaged. So the indirect costs are much higher. So we're going to go through a few case studies. So the Ferguson Rock slide, this one is a pretty popular one around here. This is along Highway 140 as you go into Yosemite, so this is the northern entrance into the park. This occurred in the spring of 2006, and it is still there. It's been a very long time. There is a temporary bridge bypass that goes across the Merced River, and then it continues on this side of the canyon, and then it'll go back over onto the regular 140. It was set up as a temporary bypass with the expectation that there would be some mitigation measure put in place, but there have been a lot of issues because there's continuous movement on this slide. So they started to move debris in early 2015 to build a rock shed, which is that basically shed over the highway that I showed you earlier. And that didn't work very well because more material started to come down. Because as you can imagine, if you remove the toe of the landslide, it's going to keep coming down. So nothing is yet finished. There's no mitigation measure in place, but you can visit this rock slide. It's not in Yosemite National Park. It's just outside of it along 140. I'm sure you've probably seen it many times before if you've been up there. All right, another one is in Yosemite. This is a Happy Isles rockfall that happened in 1996. This was actually two separate falls on the same day, which equaled about 120 million kilograms of rock, which is a lot. It also generated earthquakes. It was that impactful. So about magnitude 2, which isn't very high, but it's still pretty impressive for rocks falling off a cliff. It also generated tornado force winds of up to 400 kilometers per hour, which is very, very fast. And a lot of trees were snapped in half from those winds. So here is the source of this rockfall. These are the different rock pieces that came down in different orders. So first you had A come down, and then we saw B, C, and D, and it kind of shows you their path. And what's kind of interesting about this one is it started off as a slide, so it slid down this shelf, and then it went into free fall after it hit this significant point here. So we have a slide initially, so this is kind of a combo. So we have a rock slide, and then we see the fall after it hit this prominent point. So here is the source. This is where it slid, and then this line here is the point at which it started to go into free fall. And it shows you approximately where everything landed. You can see that a lot of material is down here. A lot of it looks like rock dust, and a lot of trees have been taken out. Here's the impact site. You can see most of the rock debris here. There's rock dust, boulders, and then you can also see all of the trees that have been snapped from the impact. Here is the seismic waves that were a result of it. Like I said, it was about a magnitude 2, but it's still pretty cool to see that falling rocks can actually have so much of an impact to generate a little mini earthquake. So we talked about this way back when we were actually meeting face to face. We talked about S waves and our P waves and our lag time there. Okay, so here is the Upper Pines campground, which is right below the impact site, and some of the dust that came from all of the wind from the impact. So it formed this dust cloud as everything hit the ground. Winds took off with a bunch of dust, and it all deposited on Upper Pines campground. Okay, this video is very awesome. I believe I will be assigning it to you as part of your homework as well. So make sure you check this one out. This actually has a recorded video in Yosemite of a rockfall. So that's pretty awesome. Okay, so this is just a fun little meme saying that you were warned there are falling rocks, and this is a very significant one. So although you may not think an area is landslide prone, there are signs like this up for a reason. It has happened before. So a lot of the times what occurs is people don't think that it's a landslide prone area. They either try to bypass the studies before they start developing, or they think that they're safe. And then there's a prehistoric landslide there, or something very drastic happens where there is a loss of life or loss of property. And this is the case in La Conchita. So this is in the southern coast of California. This is a very high-end kind of suburbia between LA or Ventura and Santa Barbara along the coast of California. So they are a fairly small little area, town, excuse me. They're a very small town, and there have been, within the last 30 years, 2 separate landslide occurrences that threaten these very expensive homes. So here outlined on the topographic map, we have the 1995 landslide, and then the yellow is the 2005 landslide. So here what we can see in this kind of side shot of the community is, see this kind of outline right here? That is very significant when you're doing development studies because this right here is an old landslide scarp. So they built this community right below a prehistoric landslide that you can already see in this photograph where there's already a scarp. So it's pretty obvious to a geologist that this would not be a very good place to develop a community. Now, what would be a better place is somewhere up here on the hill, but of course that's not right up their beachfront property, is it? Okay, so here are some more outlines of the landslides. So here is the prehistoric scarp that I just showed you, so that's red. And this blue is the 1995, and this yellow is the 2005. So they got kind of lucky because this entire thing didn't come down, but it's still pretty bad considering this significant amount of material made it down to these homes. Okay, so what's really interesting to see is the rainfall record. So in 1995, in March, there was pretty record rainfall between January and March, and then we see the landslide. So this was pretty record rainfall for them. And then we see the same thing in 2005. Very significant rainfall, and then right after that, you see the landslide occur. So these were definitely rainfall driven. And here are some pictures from the landslide. You can see the main scarp here from this particular landslide and the material that came down. Pretty significant. You can see kind of some of their mitigation measures here, which obviously didn't work. And you can see in this other photo some of the damaged homes. Okay, so here's another look at that outline. We have, so this northern portion of the community was safe from these 2 landslides, but the southern portion was damaged pretty significantly. Here's some more pictures of the damage. You can see some water saturation on the slope. You see a lot of damaged homes. Here's a look. We kind of already had one similar to this. And then here's that mitigation measure that they had from the 1995 landslide. But in the 2005 landslide, it did not do anything. I guess it held back here, but this material didn't move at all. So the material that did move, it just toppled right over it. So that mitigation measure was not appropriate for this particular landslide. There's some more images of some of the damage that was caused by the landslide. All right, and then another one that's kind of rural, that's pretty cool, is a copper mine in Bingham. This happened in 2013. This is a pretty remarkable photograph. But one of the things that happens with mines is that they oversteepen the slope as they are digging. So they're digging and trying to get material out of the ground. In this case, this would be a copper mine, so they're getting copper out. So open pit mines are usually over steepened very significantly. As you can see, they try to put these steps in here to help that, in addition to driving up the road. But as you can tell here, it caused some significant damage. And these are some of the haulers that drive up and down those roads you just saw that are covered in the landslide to material. And to give you some perspective, this is about how big each of those haulers are. So as you can tell, they look like little Tonka trucks down here, but they are gigantic. So just to give you kind of an idea of the mass. Okay, and that is it. I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.